Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar to learn more about SB 707 and the impact it will have on the textile industry. My name is Ryan Klein, and I'm an associate with the California Product Stewardship Council. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on CPSC, and then you'll hear from Joanne Brash, Director of Outreach and Advocacy at CPSC, and Jessica Matlock, Legislative Aide for Senator Newman's office. A couple webinar procedures for today are one, ask questions as they arise if you have any. CPAC staff are monitoring the chat. And if for whatever reason we don't get to your question, you can send us an email at info@calpsc.org and we'll get around to that after the webinar. Second, the webinar will be recorded and posted to YouTube, and the slides will be shared so you can access this information once the webinar is ended. And lastly, if you have any tech issues, please contact our info email and we will help you get that sorted out and get back into the webinar. To start, I'd like to recognize our board of executives, which consists of Christina Miller, Ted Ward, Colleen Foster, and Amy Hams. It is because of them that we're able to do the good work we do and have an impact on the state of California. Here you can see the rest of our board members, which we also attribute a lot of our success to because their leadership and the support that they provide our team. So to the board members tuning in today, I speak on behalf of the whole CPSC team when we say thank you for all you do and we appreciate your work. Here you can see our CPSC team, which consists of 8 staff members. A special shout out here to Joanne and Livia for all the hard work you guys did this year, supporting SB 707 and textile stewardship projects around the state. Without you guys, textile stewardship would be in a very different place. So now to funding. CPSC is primarily funded by cities, counties, districts, and JPAs. As you can see, we receive our funding from around the state, both rural and urban communities, which is important to make sure all of California is represented and we can focus on all California residents when completing our projects and missions. We'd also like to recognize our sponsors who are instrumental in supporting our projects and allowing our staff to fulfill our mission. Whether you're a circular sponsor like Little Camper or a platinum, gold, silver, bronze, or green sponsor, we are very grateful for your generous funding, which allows us to do our work. So now to why did CPSC form? CPSC formed in 2007 to implement more effective waste management policies to handle hard to manage products that are harmful to the environment, society, and the waste management workers who handled those products at the end of their life. One of the problems throughout the 90s and in the early 2000s was that disposal bans without management plans were not working. An example of this is DTC banning CRTs, batteries, HG lamps, and sharps without any plan or funding to manage them, which resulted in really no solution at all. As you can see here, some of the problems with landfill and disposal bans are, one, they don't reduce the volume, the toxicity, or the illegal disposal of hard to manage products. They don't create disposal alternatives, such as collection and recycling options for these products. And lastly, a lot of the cost burden of managing these products is placed on the ratepayer and the taxpayer, which is not good. So because this CPSC formed to pursue our mission of shifting California's energy and material policies towards a circular economy through product stewardship and extended producer responsibility. And with that, is there anything you'd like to add here, Joanne?
Yeah, for the last 100 years, our waste managers have had to be reactive. Once the materials show up at the landfill, at the recycling MRFs, or at the hazardous waste facilities, They had to just find programs, find markets, find processors. And also in the last 2 decades, the volume of materials entering the waste stream and the complexity has exponentially grown. So creating recycling programs and creating, diversion programs became more and more complicated since CPSC was created. And so ultimately, the local governments were just fed up. They're saying, we can't create waste management programs once the materials become waste. We need to actually create the program before they enter the market so that we actually have a plan in place for the hard to manage products. Jessica, anything else to add? Since, that's kind of the background of really where EPR and extended producer responsibility came from. And I did check, not everyone on the call was born when the batteries were banned, but that was one of the first examples of mercury thermostats and batteries were banned from the landfill because they have acid and they have mercury, which are really toxic in our watershed. So just by banning them, did it create a supportive program on what to do with those products?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it very well, but we really want to look at how consumers can have access to these programs, which was a big part of 707's development. Because if it's just banned from the landfill, but a consumer has no idea where to put their other waste, then it's just going to continue to end up in the trash. I'm sure we're all guilty of throwing something away that we're not meant to. So part of 707 was trying to make collection infrastructure very available to folks so that they can actually divert that waste from the source there.
So in recent years, CPSC has worked on a lot of textile recovery projects around the entire state, doing everything from fiber identification audits to repair workshops to education campaigns. And from our work, we've been able to gather a lot of data on textile waste and use it to support textile education and really highlight the need for a bill like SB 707 to help us manage the problem of textile waste. In the next year, we look forward to continuing to collaborate with cities and counties to educate more Californians, collect more data on textile waste, and hopefully in the future see a shift in the amount of textile waste being produced and landfilled within the state.
And we have more projects to announce in 2025. Today's not the day to announce them, but one of our favorite type of projects, we have a handheld fiber identification device. So it's a near infrared device that's, about the size of a flashlight. And so we can go into waste streams and we've worked with thrift stores, we've worked with, a couple different brands where actually identifying the fibers using those devices is a really fun project, but also using that device for education. We've gone to middle schools, we've gone to universities, we've done a lot of professional development with, waste staff and employees, where understanding the material types and fiber types has been, a really big crux of our education campaign. But as Ryan announced, it's about getting the data, getting the information, and ultimately getting everyone prepared for the new upcoming program.
Here you can see our stewardship spectrum. As you can also see, CPSC covers the whole spectrum with the work that we do in product stewardship, all the way from policies and product stewardship that is 100% industry funded to policies and product stewardship that has no industry funding. This year, along with SB 707, CPSC sponsored SB 1280, the 1-pound refillable propane cylinders bill. Both of these bills got passed and were on different ends of the spectrum. And what this highlights is the importance in engaging brands, businesses, waste management authorities, and all involved in the industry when developing policies for hard to manage products. Because what this does is it allows us to understand the concerns and needs of the industry and find a policy solution on this spectrum that best fits the unique product type being handled. And so with that being said, I'd like to pass it off to Jessica to introduce SB 707.
Actually, before we move on, I want to just kind of remind people that even though SB 707 was the first textile EPR program in the country, it's actually the 14th EPR program in the state. So CalRecycle are the enforcement staff. They're well experienced. I mean, when you look at carpet, paint, mattresses, these have been around for over a decade. Some of them have had problems and challenges. And what we have found in our experience of over 17 years of CPSC's advocacy is that sticking to the true philosophy of extended producer responsibility is a really key part of the program's design. If you look at carpet, paint, mattresses, they've started adding consumer fees, public money. And once you have an element of consumer buy-in with a financial fee, it really changes how the program and how the responsibility is actually managed and regulated. So by giving public money to an industry group, we didn't see the changes in products and the changes in green design that are built into EPR. Because the crux of EPR is if it's funded by the industry, they're more incentivized to make their products more easy to manage, to build up partnerships that help the materials flow with ease. And so ultimately, when you see the left side of the spectrum, which is the pure EPR programs in California, this list is growing. There were 5 EPR legislation last year that passed. 3 of them were signed by the governor and 2 were vetoed. We're seeing CalRecycle and the legislature really prefer to stick to the true model that is proven to have the transparency and the programmatic efficiency of EPR, and really give CalRecycle the authority to make sure that the program's running well. So we'll talk more over the next hour and a half about how EPR is structured and how the textile program is structured. But we like to start with kind of giving it on a spectrum so you can understand that there's quite a few of these types of programs in California. Many of them are getting updated regularly, and some of them are maybe going to be updated in the future. So definitely encourage everyone to stay involved. And once you've learned about EPR, you might actually have participated in one of these programs. If you've lived in California and you paid the $10.50 on your mattress, or if you've gone to your Kaiser or Walgreens and noticed a medicine disposal bins, that's EPR. Typically, the consumers don't really know what kind of waste program or how it's funded. They just know that there's a more convenient place to take this product that they didn't previously have a place to take.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jessica Matlock. I am a staffer in the Senate. Unfortunately, Senator Newman lost his reelection bid, so I am no longer with his office. To be determined where I land. I believe I know where I'm going, but it's not official yet, so I'm not going to say. But that being said, Senator Newman is no longer a senator in the state legislature. So that means that your advocacy as the program gets up and running into other offices and to, potentially wherever I am is super important to make sure that the bill is being implemented, right? Because the senator that passes it usually watches something with a close eye and makes sure that kind of the vision is going. He won't be here to do that. So, but I will be, and there are plenty of other folks in the legislature that helped pass this bill that are very interested and will be watching its implementation. So just a little bit of that, but back to kind of background of SB 707. The senator and I and CPSC worked on this bill for 2 years in the legislature, and CPSC had developed it in a working group for many years prior to that. So, they brought this idea based on what they were seeing from waste management organizations, as Joanne spoke about, that this product type is very recyclable, but has no way to really be diverted from the waste stream currently. There is a good secondhand market, but kind of those reverse logistics financing of collection, of transportation, of sorting, and ultimately either recycling or upcycling, reusing. those aren't there, right? And so textiles are the fastest growing component of our waste stream. It's a huge issue, and CPSC brought this to the senator, and he thought it was an amazing idea. Like everybody, he's seen articles about textiles filling up, beaches in different parts of the world, and wanted to do something about it, and felt that California is uniquely positioned to do so. So we took, the full 2 legislative years that are available in California's legislative cycle to work with as many stakeholders as we possibly could. We had an open door and a big table, and came out with a really, really solid bill, we believe, and are excited to see its implementation start. But we were very intentional about including stakeholders from all parts of the value chain, and being responsive to that. We amended the bill, I think, like 10 different times, which just really shows the reiterative process that we intentionally went through to make this a really good program that can work. Because since it's industry funded and industry led, if the folks from industry were telling us these parts of different things aren't going to work, we wanted to listen to that as much as possible too. So while still having obviously a very green bill, and we were able to get everybody on board, and there was no opposition to the bill as we went into the finish line, which we believe is the first EPR bill to do so. So yeah, that's kind of my little rant, but I will we'll keep going forward. So.
And this is a reminder that we really could not have done this without Senator Newman, and the way he leads and the way he takes the stakeholder meetings really as a priority. It's not like that with every legislator. And so CPSC, having sponsored, at that point, maybe 10 EPR bills prior, we had a lot of working experience with Senator Newman on the battery EPR bill. I always like to remind people, if you're also in the e-waste recycling or that space, that program will get going a lot sooner than the textile program. But yeah, Senator Newman was such an amazing leader, and without his leadership, none of this would have been possible.
So I kind of already said this, but we had over 158 endorsements from local groups to environmental orgs to brands, retailers, and industry, waste haulers, sorters, recyclers. We were really proud to kind of get support from people all along this value chain. And like I kind of said, patting ourselves on the back, we're the first EPR bill to pass with no opposition on record. And again, I credit Senator Newman in our process of collaboration with doing that, where we really did listen to folks from all across the spectrum, and we're as responsive as we could be, right? There's some things that you have to stay strong on, as you should, but we were able to get everybody on board, which was pretty great. And I think that, that will make it so it's a more implementable process. You are the same folks that will be on the implementation side as well. So we wanted to make sure it was as good as possible.
And there's a lot of organizations who were really involved and really supportive, although they didn't go into public support. So big thank you to all of those out there. And also just kind of reminding everyone the importance of associations and organizations, policy organizations, because typically we work with lobbyists and associations who represent multiple brands. It's actually more rare to have individual brands splinter out. In past EPR bills, we had to beg certain brands to splinter from the associations. This was a really different product type. There were brands showing up at the door. There were brands even in opposition, happily, walking the halls and reporting their lobbying. So that in itself is kind of rare, because most of the time they're hiding behind their associations and making their negotiations that way. But I think this is one of the first examples for some of the trade associations to really get involved at state and local policy. Traditionally, trade policy, federal, is kind of the strong suit for a lot of the associations and their members. So it was really amazing to see in this particular EPR bill the amount of engagement from specific organizations, specific industry sectors, the Textile Rental Association, the Toy Association, looking at some of the laundries and really niche associations too. It was history setting to cross the line with zero opposition on record. We'll talk later on the slides about the kind of 2 remaining discussion points that got the final 2 organizations neutral. And we're really thankful that they were able to pull their opposition from at the hearing. And so we all crossed the finish line, side by side, and really set history. And one of the most progressive EPR program of the 14 that are here in CalRecycle.
Okay, so what's happening next? The bill is really just the kind of starting point. Yes, we spent a lot of time and energy on on making sure the legislation said we wanted to say, but that's not, into reality. So coming into the regulatory phase is where kind of the rubber is going to meet the road. And there's a lot of details that have not been flushed out at all that is intentionally left for the regulatory process so that you all and whoever else is invested in this can participate and make sure that how it's implemented works, right? So there's some things that you can kind of do right now. CalRecycle, so anywhere that it says the department in the legislation, that is the Department of California Recycle and Reuse. I forget the long name. It's called CalRecycle. They're great. And you can go to the website, join their listserv. I'm already on it. They'll be, posting any updates. There will be workshops that are kind of informal. It's before the actual regulatory process begins, so that they can hear feedback from folks about, concerns, what they're worried about, what they want things to look like. And then it'll go into draft regulations. And that timeline, I think we have a timeline slide somewhere in here. There's a good 5+ years of implementation timeline before kind of the deadline sets in for full plan implementation.
Yeah, and also just a reminder, well, thank you to all the CalRecycle staff attending today. They've already created their website, so you can get on the listserv as soon as their announcements are made. Everyone hears them at the same time. They go public, they get sent to that listserv. So I really encourage you to go to their website, join the listserv, and the first year is just workshops. CalRecycle will be receiving information. There'll be discussion questions, presentations, research updates, and opportunities to present public comment during those workshops. After those workshops is really when we see the first written regulations. And when we go over the timeline slide, we'll talk about the PRO and how those regulations align with the program's operator selection. But ultimately, the regulations are CalRecycle's instructions for how the PRO, the program operator, will carry out the requirements. So as Jessica mentioned, the legislation is really the starting point, because CalRecycle can't just make a program. You can't just say, we want to work on textiles. A law has to actually pass to authorize them to begin. So now Jessica and the hardest part of our job is done. We will stay engaged, but ultimately now the hardest work goes to CalRecycle staff, and they're really well equipped and really well staffed with people with experience in EPR and program implementation. So looking forward to those workshops. If you're involved with CPSC and on our listservs, we'll be hosting lunch and kind of facilitating to help our network attend. The workshops will be hybrid, so if you can't come in person, you can attend virtually. Here we go. Here's the timeline.
A beautiful timeline. Let's see. So yes, 25, CalRecycle's already established the website, which is public for everybody, and get on that listserv to get communicated. And kind of the first point of in statute timeline deadline is by 2026 on January 1st. Applications to serve as the PRO are due. So kind of stepping back a little bit, the PRO, for those who maybe don't know, is the Product Resource or Responsibility Organization, and that is composed of the producers of textiles and clothing, and that is where the funding and the kind of implementation lives and settles after underneath the regulations of CalRecycle. So the PRO, it's going to be a competitive application process. There will be folks, kind of to be determined on what that looks like, but it could come from lots of different places, and then it'll be on CalRecycle to determine, who the best application is, who can finance things, who's got an organizational structure that will work, and they determine that by March 1st. And then by July 1st, all the producers must join that PRO. So that's kind of the first hard deadline for folks in the production industry. And then they will launch into a needs assessment once they're established as the PRO to kind of get a lay of the land. And this was something that the industry actually asked that we included in the bill, so that, which made a lot of sense to us, that you have to get the lay of the land, understand where collection already is existing, maybe where like there's already some money moving, what are the economics, where is the holes that need to be filled. So they will be conducting that needs assessment, and that will be due back to CalRecycle in 2027. And then by 2028, in July 1, CalRecycle is required to adopt the regulations to implement the program. So throughout, from now until 2028, those draft regs, and that's a public process, legally, they're required to make it a public process, so anybody can comment on draft regulations, and make their voice heard on how they want the program to look from whatever perspective you're coming from. And then, so once those regs are published, the PRO and the industry has a year from that date to finalize a PRO plan and to submit that. That's 2030. They have to submit it and have it approved. 2029 submit, 2030 approval, because there could be some back and forth with the department if the plan isn't up to par with their regulations. And then by 2030, they have to start implementing it. And 2032, the department can look back over and see kind of how it's going and tweak some regulations. And that's when also penalties could start to be levied, is by 2032. So if there's a producer that isn't part of the PRO and isn't complying with the bill, they could be penalized up to $50,000 a day for willful non-compliance. So that was a very key piece, enforcement piece. Some people know these brands can have a lot of money, and so if the fines aren't high enough to really make a dent and to feel it, some brands could just not comply and make that part of their business model, which happens with government regulations often if that threshold isn't high enough. So that's kind of the timeline as it reads here and as I see it. Joanne, did I miss anything?
No, I mean, these are in the law. They're not going to change. These are really the milestones. There might be smaller deadlines, that CalRecycle sets, like usually 30-day comment periods, or the PRO, the program operator, might have an internal deadline for data submission. But these are the milestones that are in the law, and they won't be changing. They're pretty standard for EPR programs. Like a 5-year implementation is pretty normal for products, specifically because EPR has that extra phase, which is the plan writing phase. So not only do we have the regulations, but we have that plan writing phase. So ultimately, once the PRO is selected, and we do have a slide on the PRO because there are a lot of questions about the PRO, that's when the PRO begins the needs assessment. So it is an industry-run needs assessment that's approved by CalRecycle. And at every one of these milestones, every draft document or every document that's submitted to CalRecycle is public and then open for comments. So just as a reminder, if you are new to working in policy in California, CalRecycle and a lot of our other, public agencies follow processes like Bagley-Keene and Robert's Rules of Order. So there are really key methods for our public agencies to be accessible, free, and ultimately be a platform to give them feedback before final decisions are made. So of these timelines, don't worry, we will send the slides. The other things to kind of remind yourself is CalRecycle does meetings every single month. So for example, the November month is when they announced that the Textile page was up and running. So for those of us who are really active advocates in California, we're attending those meetings every month. And once the Textile program gets closer to final approval, those will be the meetings that you attend to hear the director's final decisions. The other thing is the annual report. We'll talk later in this presentation about the annual report, but that's probably one of the most important documents other than the plan. The annual report is where the progress is reported to CalRecycle, and that's the document that's really used for leveraging enforcement. And then the plan is written every 5 years. So there's only one program operator to begin with. We heard from the industry, even though we've heard, competition of multiple is good, we heard doing one needs assessment and having one option for the first 5 years made it simpler and easier to understand how the program will operate. So after the first 5 years, groups and brands can break off into separate programs with CalRecycle's approval. And that approval process will be, determined at that time, but how are they going to share the needs assessment? How are the groups going to share the education campaign? Those kind of details won't be decided until that arises, that certain groups want to break out, but that is an option. Want me to take the Jessica, or you can?
Yeah, why don't you take the lead on this one? I'll sweep.
Yeah. So basically, the program has, or the law, we'll say, the way it's written has really key components, and these sections again are really standard for a lot of the EPR programs. And a lot of the other product EPR programs that have veered from the model are sometimes hard to enforce or don't have the impact that is the initial intent. So each of these boxes represent a different section of the law that really outlines what's required, what's going to happen. And so we have slides for each of these, but mostly I'm going to go into details of the plan. A lot of the questions that we hear from different stakeholders are usually the answer is, we don't know that detail yet. It's going to come in the plan. What's the fee going to be? We don't know. First, we have to do the models, or they have to do the models, and then they have to write the plan. So we'll kind of talk about each of these sections, but we'll spend the most time on the plan because that's ultimately where all the details of how the program's going to be structured and carried out get written and reviewed.
Yep. And then I'll just note, I did put the text of the bill of the law. It's not a bill anymore, it's law, into the chat. So if you want to take a look in there, we spent a lot of time, with any law, definitions are really key, because you can say one thing, and you think it means something, but in reality or in other text, it means something else. So that was a key part of, negotiations and development of this bill. So, in terms of like who counts as a producer, what products are covered in the program, that's all very clearly defined. That's some of the most detail really in the bill, is those pieces, because that's kind of where you set the parameters for what's in and what's out. So yeah, there is lots of things in the law that are enumerated, but there's also a lot that's left to be figured out within the plan process, because we want that iterative regulatory process to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing some really great questions about education and awareness of the program itself. And yeah, absolutely, that's happening. So us as advocates and a lot of the other stakeholders are sharing information about SB 707, but ultimately the PRO or someone who wants to apply to be the PRO needs to actually recruit some members and to show that they've actually engaged the stakeholders. So I do think, once January 1st passes, we will see a lot more outreach, but I do raise caution that if somebody's trying to sell compliance, to be wary. At this point, nobody knows what's going to be required for compliance. That doesn't come until CalRecycle regulations are adopted. So we know in theory, what's going to be fined and where those thresholds of enforcement might happen. But those details of compliance won't come till 2028. So building partnerships is important, but also be wary if someone's trying to sell you compliance or opportunities other than advocacy at this point. So the producer responsibility organizations, these are really unique to product stewardship and EPR programs. So traditionally, waste is managed by local government, those who fund CPSC, cities, counties. When certain products are problematic or kind of raised to the state's awareness, the state will run those products. Bottles, cans, the deposit program. And EPR, extended producer responsibility programs, have a different philosophy. The money to manage the program doesn't go to the state, and the materials don't go to the state. The theory is if it's an industry funded and industry run program who knows their products, who have relationships with the recyclers and collectors, that it's going to be more efficient and more adaptive to market changes than if it's a government run program. So a producer responsibility organization is really unique to these types of programs. But as I mentioned, we have 14 of these programs in California. And traditionally, the PRO is a nonprofit offshoot of the main trade association. So for example, the Carpet and Rug Institute is the main carpet association. Carpet America Recovery Effort, CARE, is their program, their PRO for the carpet program. Similarly, if those have participated in the mattress program, ISPA, the International Sleep Products Association, is the main trade association. And MRC, the Mattress Recycling Council, is the PRO, the offshoot of that trade association. So that has been, traditionally, but this particular bill does make it a competitive process. So there are certain requirements that are guiding the PRO's structure and application process, but ultimately nobody's going to know who applies until January 1, 2026. And CalRecycle decides and picks the application by March. So they have 3 months. And ultimately, once that decision's made, then there's, until July to join the PRO that's been selected. March through July will be the heaviest outreach for joining and out to brands. Before that moment, there's no obligation to really pay in. There's no obligation to join any one particular PRO. But the PRO does have to prove to CalRecycle that they have financial responsibility, that they do have funding and brands backing them up. There are requirements on the board. It has to represent multiple product types, not just apparel. It has to have ex officio members from the different sectors. And ultimately, they don't have to have the money in the bank, but they have to show that they have a plan for, not an official plan, but the modeling experience and the potential to run a $100+ million program. We don't know how much the program will cost, but we are saying, in theory, if it's going to be $100 million annual budget, the PRO has to be responsible enough to manage that big of a budget. Our mattress program is, I believe, 50 million a year. I might mix up my numbers now that I'm on the spot, but our established programs are 50 million plus, and they're much smaller product scopes. So we do expect this program to be a really big budget, a really big material scope, but ultimately it's probably not the biggest. Packaging might have won that one, but if there's questions about the PRO, put them in the chat, but it is a little bit of an unknown. CPSC has heard about from 4 different organizations interested. We've definitely advised on, that ability to manage a big budget and manage a relationship with CalRecycle and other stakeholders. But once January 1st comes around and the program is officially started, I expect to hear from different organizations to really speak up, put their names out there, and start building that coalition behind their application to hopefully get selected. Jessica, anything to add?
No, nothing to add.
So covered products, this is a fun part of the bill because this decides who's in, who's out. In other EPR bills, it's been a little bit easier, carpet, mattresses, one product type, medicine needles, they had 2 different programs. So when we had apparel and textiles, we started the process just looking at the full scope. Let's just, put the whole list out there. And ultimately what we heard from stakeholders was the universe is too big. We ultimately need to know if we're in, if we're out, and they prefer to use the HTS codes to identify the products. So whereas we couldn't actually use the code numbers, we went through the HTS code names and copied and pasted them into the list. Then we shared the list around, and a few products got taken off. Ultimately, not every product that falls under these categories of apparel and textiles were good qualifiers for the program. Namely, toys, those got taken off. I didn't want that, but it was a good decision because they don't always mix well. They have their own challenges as a product. And if this program's successful, maybe toys will be a future program. But another one was PPE and protective equipment that are exposed to hazardous chemicals. Obviously, none of us want those. We also didn't want single-use, hygienic products that technically sometimes fall under textile articles, but face wipes, the makeup removers, they are technically a non-woven textile, but they really didn't fit into this product or to this program. They're wet, they get dirty after use, and they could be exposed to certain contaminants. So the other key thing that we amended into this definition is if you look at the second sentence of each definition, it says, for the purposes of this chapter, apparel includes only. That one word was really key. So if it's not on the list, it's not in the program. Tents, camping tents, that was another one. We took it out because it's hard to check if they're usable. If the poles are sticking out, it could be dangerous. The thrift stores and collectors didn't really want camping tents. So ultimately, this is the final list, but CalRecycle does have authority to add more after 2032. 2032 is a key year. The regulations can't be changed before then, but ultimately, yes, products can be changed in the future. The covered producers, another one of our big questions. Are we in? Are we out? And so the definition of producer has actually been used for most of the EPR programs. So although the tiered definition is pretty standard in EPR programs in California, there were a few details we had to add for the specifics of the textile and apparel industry. So technically, the definition of producer is a person who manufactures and owns the license or the trademark, and basically whoever's putting it on the market. We know in a lot of examples and past products that sometimes fees are not paid, and sometimes organizations or entities might not want to pay the fee. So it becomes a tiered definition. Especially if the entity is abroad and California agencies might not have the strongest authority to collect fees. So we'll talk about that in the enforcement section. So ultimately, there's a tiered definition so that if one entity doesn't take responsibility and pay the fee, it falls on the next entity. So if the trademark owner or the brand owner doesn't pay the fee, it falls on the importer. If the importer doesn't pay the fee, the distributor, retailer, or wholesale seller pays the fee. And ultimately, if a brand or entity, no one pays the fee, they go on the list of non-compliant brands. For this product type, that list of non-compliant brands is one of the most important enforcement pieces because we have so many watchdogs and so many advocacy groups in this industry. The moment CalRecycle posts that list of non-compliant brands, our watchdogs are going to have a heyday. So let's say, in theory, some direct-to-consumer import groups don't pay the fee. They'll be put on that list and then ultimately banned from sale in California. There are a few exemptions. So these want to be really clear because we're really proud of these exemptions. One of them is the $1 million de minimis. So if a producer has $1 million or less of total turnover, total sales, they are not paying in the program. That is our small business de minimis. So you are exempted from the program. You do have to report to the PRO that you are exempt. But that detail comes a few years down the line, but not obligated to pay. The other thing is if you are a seller of only secondhand clothes, not paying the fee. So we do want to be clear that we are really proud of the small business exemption and the secondhand market exemption because ultimately we want businesses to thrive and we want secondhand markets to thrive. And we'll talk a little bit later because reuse is funded through the program, but the burden doesn't fall on the secondhand markets or the secondhand retailers. Anything to add, Jess? So how is this program funded? So, recycling isn't free. We all know that. We all pay, if you live in California or other states, you maybe pay a deposit on your cans, you paid $10 on your mattresses, you paid your garbage bill that makes sure that you can put your garbage cans to the street. But recycling isn't free. There's labor that's involved around the collection, sortation, and processing. So even though, we know it's important for GHG purposes, we know it's important for circularity purposes, we all know recycling is important. The way we fund the program is a way that we can actually incentivize some of the changes we want to see that we couldn't get into the law. So I'll talk about this in a little bit, in a little more detail, but ultimately what we call eco-modulated fees. The carpet program was the first in the United States to have eco-modulated fees, but we called them differential assessments back then. The EU changed the wording on us, and so now we've kind of shifted to calling them eco-modulated fees to be synonymous with the other continent who has a lot more EPR programs than us. So the quote at the top is directly pulled from the law, but ultimately, this is the guidance that the law gives to CalRecycle. CalRecycle will set some of the scope and some of the details for how it's going to be calculated. But ultimately, the PRO will determine what are the fee levels based on what they found in the needs assessment. So there are 0 fees, like I mentioned, for producers that only sell secondhand. So there is no fee for those producers and those retailers who are only in the secondhand space. How reuse really fits into the model and how it'll be considered in the fee structure will be to determine during the modeling, during the needs assessment, because ultimately the fee is on a new product when it enters the market. But that fee has to include the reuse program thereafter. So reuse is funded in the initial fee setting, but how that detail is and how it models out with those different reuse markets is to be determined after the modeling, the needs assessment, and the plan writing. The reduced fees. So these are examples of potential factors of modulation. So some of them are in law, like what's on the top, but what's in the boxes are just examples of interpretations of what's in the law. So for example, there is a language in the bill that existing take-back programs that align with the statute are going to be considered when the eco-modulated fees, because we don't want brands and producers paying twice. If you're paying for a take-back program and you have partnerships developed in contracts, you basically have to communicate with the PRO and get a reduction in your fee. But just having a take-back program alone is not enough. Ultimately, it has to be a take-back program that aligns with the requirements of the plan. And we'll go into a little more detail, but reuse, repair, transparency, if those are not aligned with statute, it's not enough to actually get a fee reduction. Monomaterials, better labeling, durability, these are not things that we could explicitly put in law, but there's incentives. If there's better labeling and fiber identification, it's a lower cost to the program because it's easier to manage. So when you look at the language in the bill, it says, the cost of reusing, repairing, and recycling and otherwise managing these products. So if the cost to identify those fibers are more challenging, that's not going to get you a fee reduction, but better labeling will. And side note, garment labels are federally preempted, so we could not do anything about labels at the state level, but we can incentivize, lower fees or better reporting ease with the updated labeling technologies. Also things like monomaterial, single fibers, like California and a lot of governments in the United States don't prefer prescriptive design standards. Europe does tend to take a different approach, but here in the United States, we have a couple things in our Constitution and federally that really limit on how we cannot limit the capacity of commerce, and we cannot really tell producers what to do with the products that they currently own. So there were a few things that, things like durability. We can't say everyone needs to make more durable items, but if you can prove maybe through industry standards and certificates that certain products are more durable and won't enter the waste program, then ultimately that's a lower cost to manage them. So a lot of them through incentives and not prescriptive mandates. So some of the questions we get are, how does Europe compare to California? And that's one of the big differences. But I will say what Europe adopts will definitely influence here. And if the PRO wants to make it easy on themselves, maybe citing those standards would be easier for implementation. The textile program is the first one to put malice fees. So this is an opportunity for the PRO or even CalRecycle to that level of engagement in increased fees. So adding fees and fines that are not necessarily non-compliance fines, but malice fees to really rectify some of the really distinct challenges within the products entering the market. So things like underreporting or not as involved with the reporting that's required. Maybe there's chemicals that are being added to the products that are not necessarily banned in California, but are impeding recyclability at the processors. So the PRO has the ability to add fees for the products that are harder to manage and actually causing problems or malice to the program. There's a really good question about monitoring overproduction. And so it's a really good question because There are certain pieces of data that will be kept confidential through the PRO and through CalRecycle through the antitrust provisions. But ultimately, overproduction is kind of an interesting topic because it's really hard to regulate. But the fee is per unit. So for the first time in history, we'll know the number of units sold into the state merely based on how many fees were paid. Overproduction's a little hard because if the producers are not selling the product, they technically own it. So it doesn't enter the program or enter the reporting system. Great questions. Keep them coming. We love them. So I'll stop here, hand it to Jessica to kind of introduce the plan, because the plan is arguably one of the most important components of the program.
Absolutely. So kind of as we've been talking about with this timeline, with the implementation and with the bill, you know, we put in different things that the plan must have, but those details will be developed with the PRO and the reg process. So there will be again a lot more fleshing out throughout that process. But things that it must include is, you know, a budget and a fee structure that allows that. So as Joanna was talking about, the eco-modulated fees, regardless of how they decide to allocate that within their producers, it has to be a total budget that is capable, according to the department, of doing all the things that we've required. So collection, transportation, you know, diverging, sorting. It has to have a big enough budget to cover all of that. And that will be determined, you know, through contracts with certain folks. Part of the planning phase 2 is that they have to kind of publish example contracts so that, you know, if you want to be a collector or your business does, you know what that looks like and what, you know, the exchange for your services would be for the program. But the impetus is still on the PRO because they're the ones that are legally obligated to do this. So they need to make those contracts, you know, competitive and attractive to folks to be able to pick up. So if they're not, then they're the ones out of compliance. Part of it is as well, we did include some things about, you know, PFAS and regulated chemicals. So they have to come up with plans and ideas of how to address this within the waste stream, right? Because we do want folks to recycle and reuse clothing, but if we're just pumping back in, you know, these chemicals that California and others are continuing to identify as toxic to our water sources and to our population, we don't really want that either, right? We don't want that to go into a continuous loop. So you know, there are technologies being developed where it does appear that it can, you know, get PFAS out of some stock. So that will be part of, you know, what the plan and the PRO has to look at and analyze as well. And then I think I said this in the beginning, but a really key piece of this is consumer access and collection. And making that as convenient as possible, because it's easy to just throw something away in the trash can in your kitchen and take it out to the curb. But you know, we do have already kind of a little bit of a culture, depending on who you are, of donating your clothes to thrifts or putting them in a collection bin that already exists that you know gets taken to other places. So there is a little bit in the collective conscious about like, okay, this is we bring our used clothes somewhere else, and so the PRO has to launch an educational campaign for the public to make sure that folks know where and how to drop off their used clothing and what's allowed in the program, and that, you know, has to be funded again. Sorry, I'm kind of skipping around on these timeline things, but reuse and repair is definitely part of the program. There was a question in the beginning in the chat about that. The PRO can't just take things and recycle them. We have it in law that they have to follow the waste hierarchy. You know, the regulations are going to be more specific about that as well. And yeah, there's got to be funding for repair and reuse as well. That's in the law. So any plan that they submit that only goes to recycling, that's not going to be an approved plan. They also have to create their own performance measures and standards, which I know can sound a little concerning that, oh, the brands are making their own performance standards, but the bill sets up this interesting tension between CalRecycle, the regulatory authority, and the producers, where basically if they don't set really good performance standards for themselves, the department has the authority to come in and kind of set anything. So there's kind of an incentive for the PRO to set good performance standards for themselves instead of, waiting for the department to come in and set higher ones, right? So, and again, I think with all of this and why this process worked is that there's a lot of movement in the industry to want to use recycled material, but it's just hard to access right now. And so this whole program will be kind of providing the seed money for those processes to be able to access more recycled feedstock. And you're basically collectively subsidizing that as an industry to make that cheaper at the end point. So then hopefully recycled material is competitive with virgin material. That's kind of the overarching circularity goal. And so the plan, will be looking to make sure that can happen. It's ambitious, it's big, but because of the kind of reiterative process and look back, like how Recycle is able to do throughout, tweaks can be made kind of throughout the process to make sure it happens.
And the plan section of the law is the longest part. It's the longest section. So these green boxes are just kind of the sections of the section. So here's high level what's in the plan. If you go to the bill text, you'll see there are details, like the budget and the fee structure has to consider GHG. It has to prioritize reuse and repair. When you talk about the PFAS, it talks about, measuring that in the needs assessment and then understanding, how is that going to be determined in the plan. So we do have slides for a lot of the big components, but I do encourage everyone to go into the plan details because there's so many sectors of this industry that can tap into the different program requirements. So whether you're a sorter, you're going to find really specific provisions that apply for authorized sorters. If you're an education organization, if you do education in sustainable fashion, there's an entire section of the plan of how they're going to fund education and what has to be in the campaign and how they report the outcomes of that education. So this is high level, but just know if you go into the bill, it is a lot more detailed as to what's required in the plan. There's also a limitation of how many times they can submit the plan. We saw with carpet, it took almost 4 or 5 times of resubmission to get a final plan approved. It wasted 1.5 years of some people's lives, myself included. So moving forward, a lot of the EPR programs say, after 2 attempts to get your plan approved, the PRO could be unseated. So there are really clear enforcement measures as to when the plan has to be ultimately finalized. And Jessica mentioned performance standards. So previously in past EPR programs, there's been a recycling rate that has to be met by a certain date, 24% by 2024 or 2020. And what we found historically is setting those rates in law made it inflexible for the PRO if they didn't meet them. If something happened, like pandemic, there was no flexibility for the authorized agency or the PRO to make any adjustments. So ultimately, like Jessica said, the performance standards, so the recycling rate, the repair rate, the goals that the PRO has to meet every single year are set in the regulations in the plan. It isn't the most traditional way, but ultimately, if the needs assessment isn't done, we didn't want to hold the industry to any unfair expectations. There is one particular performance required, which is standard. And the reason that we had convenient collection as a mandatory performance standard is because we know that in our experience, EPR program operators are always going to look for what's the lowest fee, what's the easiest we can make it on the brands and producers, when the goal of the bill is how can we maximize our impact? How can we maximize the funds that are ultimately available to drive this market? So convenience is how convenient is it for the residents of California to participate? Through and through, we know that if our programs are not convenient, what the residents will do is they'll put it in their garbage, they'll put it in their plastics recycling bin, or they'll illegally dump it on a thrift store, in the streets. And these are all unfair burdens when we know that the most convenient thing is to put it on your curb, put it in your blue bin, put it to the curb. But cities and counties in California have tried that. It doesn't work. The textiles absorb liquids. They tangle because the machines are made for hard plastics. And ultimately, because we have thrift stores, we have collection kiosks, we have mailback bags. There's this entire collection infrastructure that exists that local government are excited to tap into that rather than having to update contracts with their haulers and create curbside programs. So that's kind of the philosophy of why convenient collection, because as long as it's convenient, the people will use the program. If the materials are being collected and they're held to performance goals, the obligation for the PRO to invest in processes and invest in markets comes down to meeting those performance goals. So we know they'll be collecting them, the material, because it has to be convenient. And we know that they're going to be held to performance goals eventually. And so the gap between collecting it and meeting those goals are where the PRO must invest. And that's where we ultimately will get a lot of money invested into end markets, R&D, free or low cost materials to input into new systems. And what we've seen and experienced for the established programs is really amazing research and new recycling technologies and new patents coming out of these programs. So even though it's not prescriptive in how much will be recycled, there are pathways to set those in an equitable way. And we talked about collection. So we know it needs to be convenient because people just want to drop it at the thrift store. They want to just put it in the mail. They want to just put it on the curbside. We've made convenience so important in our economy and in our lives, which is also a big driver of waste and single-use consumption. But it's also a really big factor in participation in programs. So SB 707 in this textile program is actually collection agnostic. So all methods of collection are acceptable as long as the minimum in-person brick and mortar collection sites are met. So another reason why we need that convenient collection standard, because it's focused on the physical places our residents can go to drop off. All of these additional collection methods are added convenience and added benefits. And it'll be up to CalRecycle and the PRO to really understand and plan how mailback will be addressed, or how curbside offerings will be shared throughout all the state. There's a few provisions that are important. One of them is local government who want to opt in the program cannot be denied. That's one of the things that as they develop programs, starting to get reimbursement and supportive of the programs they have established and not disrupting those will be really key. Similarly, our established thrift stores, we want to make sure we're not disrupting their material flows and really adding services and adding benefits to that established infrastructure. There's also provision that secondhand markets and nonprofits need to be prioritized. So this is a way to really make sure that our community benefit organizations and our established infrastructure is protected, but also as a way to get people to buy more secondhand. I mean, reuse is the ultimate goal, to keep materials out of the program. If the materials don't enter the program's cheaper. So we want reuse. We want things to be used longer. But ultimately, as we establish the collection sites that are part of the program, they're all going to have to meet certain standards and certain rules. And the key difference from the status quo to after the program will probably be the reporting. That's probably the biggest difference from how these collection entities exist now. Reuse and repair are prioritized. What we found in experience is just referencing the waste hierarchy in the law was not enough. So this is one of the first legislation on EPR where we took the waste hierarchy, which prioritizes source reduction, which is reuse and repair. It prioritizes, recycling over landfilling and things like that. So we were able to accomplish applying the waste hierarchy to the budget, meaning more money has to be spent on reuse and repair. We also got reuse and repair prioritized in the grants and also in some of the other financial incentives. So we're really proud of that. We're also really proud of setting a new definition of repair for the state of California, specific for this product type. It includes upcycling and redesigning. It includes mending. It includes preparing for reuse and resale. So things like ironing, adding new tags, washing things. These are all costs to the entities that are trying to get these materials back into use. So they're all fall under the definition of repair and are funded under the program. The detail of how reuse businesses will be exactly funded doesn't come until the plan. But it does differ. I know in Europe, there's a lot of repair incentives and financial incentives that go to the consumers. There is intent that this is a little more B2B. So I will say the intent of the repair mechanism isn't to give residents free repairs, but to keep the repair as part of the resale and recycling, not recycling, but resale and secondhand markets so that we can get higher quality materials by fixing some of the blemishes. The usability criteria, so the criteria of understanding when it should go into reuse, when it goes into repair, and when it goes into recycling are written in the plan. So I know, I'm sorry, I wish I had those details for you, but one of the important things are once those criteria are in the plan, they're enforceable. So another reason to really stay engaged, because I know there's a lot of organizations on this call who are involved in repair and involved in reuse. So because we don't know exactly how those will fit into the whole scheme of the program, the advocacy of what you want is really important for CalRecycle to understand so that they can make effective decisions. So recycling is for the materials that are deemed not usable and not repairable. There also are some misinformation being spread about whether or not chemical recycling is allowed in this program. So I do want to kind of remind everyone, let me get a little backstory on the definition of recycling. When we started the process, the definition of recycling is in statute. That means it has gone through regulations, it has been accepted by an agency, and it's law, and it's been law for decades. SB 54 in 2022, which was the packaging EPR bill, was the first time that definition had been updated in a very long time. That definition update was heavily debated by some of the biggest environmental organizations in the country. CPSC was involved, but we were very supportive of the process and didn't have a major stake in the definition, which was set in 2022. When we started the SB 707 process, we used the definition that was in statute, and we heard from the industry that provision allows for zero chemical recycling, that they would rather use the SB 54 definition, which was not confirmed yet and not in statute, still in draft regulations. They would rather have the moving goalpost than know the old definition. So in the big amends that happened about the halfway point, we updated the recycling definition to being the the newest definition of recycling, which was adopted under the packaging EPR bill. Then moving forward, there were a few provisions in that definition that referenced plastic. So it wasn't applicable, even though there are synthetics and plastics in clothing, it wouldn't be accurate to call it plastic. So we removed provisions 4 and 5 from that big definition, which inflared every environmental organization in the country, and some really big ones with a lot of lawyers on stuff. So the issue when we removed those plastic provisions was the concern over responsible end markets and the generation of hazardous waste in the recycling processes. So we got to a place of neutral and acceptance from all the stakeholders involved, where we kept some of the provisions and we added the intent language about hazardous waste reduction through the recycling process. Since this law has passed, CalRecycle has announced the SB 54 definition of recycling and has announced the process of evaluating and approving recycling technologies. So it's really exciting to see CalRecycle take a really proactive approach of scientific evaluation, life cycle assessment, and an appeal process that allows these technologies to come back, provide more evidence, and eventually get adopted into the program if they didn't initially get adopted. So mechanical recycling, chemical recycling is allowed under the program as long as they're approved and their processes are evaluated according to regulations. Downcycling or non-closed loop is also allowed. I know there's a lot of concern. Not everything can go back into closed. This is not a textile to textile mandate. A lot of our stuffed animals and dog beds are going to get a lot cheaper because they're going to be getting a lot of the recycled content from this program. Insulation, carpet padding, yes, that is all allowed under the program, funded under the program, but if a better process comes on board with better GHG performance, better end markets relationships, they must be prioritized over the downcycling. There are some prohibited measures. So this is maybe where some of the confusion is coming from, is California as a state has a very strict anti-incineration stance. There are other laws that have passed over the last few years that said incineration, waste to energy are actually considered disposal. That's another big difference between the European program, is waste to energy is considered recycling over there, but it is considered disposal and a detriment to the program here. Exporting waste, and I put this in yellow because exporting materials from the program is allowed. Exporting waste to international recyclers is allowed and funded. But there are certain requirements that those materials need to follow if they want that funding. And the processors abroad who receive those materials need to follow the rules to receive the subsequent funding. So if the materials are exported under waste bound for recycling, they have to go to what we call a responsible end market. And that processor has to be approved by the program. If the materials are getting exported for reuse, they have to meet the usability criteria that are going to the plan. If the people receiving the reuse open the bales and they're full of materials that are not usable, not sellable, there are mechanisms to complain to the PRO, complain to CalRecycle, and get more equitable materials in the bales. Shipping mixed materials, mixed bales that have recycling and reuse together is also allowed as long as the receiving sorter is authorized and compliant. So I do want to emphasize that exporting materials and international collaborations are allowed, but it's in yellow because there are certain stipulations that have to happen in order for it to be compliant. And then reporting, this is one of the biggest changes in the industry as a whole. I mean, for all product types, it's a little bit of a black box as to what's entering our market, where is it going? And only in recent news did we kind of see the waste accumulating in the secondhand markets because we didn't have proper reporting, transparency, and end of life support. So every year the PRO submits a report. All the details and minimum required information is in the law. They have to report the updated list of producers. They have to list every collection site, what materials were received, what markets did they go to. And these annual reports are what CalRecycle used to measure whether the performance goals have been met. I will say there have been lots of programs in California that have been found non-compliant. And the annual report becomes one of the most important documents in determining how the program is performing. I'll go back to that question about the international markets and bales, but ultimately it's the PRO that will be responsible for maintaining the contracts. So enforcement, the $10,000 a day per day of non-compliance, $50,000 a day if it's intentional, is not unique to this product. We've gotten that enforcement in multiple product types, and as Jessica mentioned, the fines have to be high enough to instill compliance and to actually drive change and not just pay the fine and go. So as I mentioned, CalRecycle is the oversight authority. They read the report. They hold those annual reports to the regulations, to the law. If the PRO is found non-compliant, the enforcement happens. CalRecycle has an enforcement branch. If enforcement finds them non-compliant, they go to court and it gets agreed, that it is non-compliant. The fines of non-compliance don't just go to the government, right? They go to a specific fund that's used to mitigate pollution, used to support impacted communities. So if it's non-compliant and there are high fees that are fines that are charged, there's a mechanism to make sure that those fines make it to be spent in a really meaningful way that are aligned with the intent of the program. There's been questions in the past of whether, in what circumstances would CalRecycle directly enforce on a local government or directly enforce on a brand. Those kind of details definitely are going to be addressed later on in the process. But what we're finding in the packaging EPR program is there are examples of when local government are expected to perform a certain way or report in a certain manner, and they are expected to meet those requirements. Also, if there's a recycling facility that isn't performing, ultimately, the PRO is responsible for reacting and addressing the problem. Because if it goes in the annual report, then CalRecycle finds the PRO. So there's a lot of incentive for the PRO through their contract enforcement, through their education, through their advocacy and engagement methods to really make sure all of their members are compliant, because more often than not, the fine goes to the PRO, not to the brands. But there is a sales ban. If a brand is found non-compliant repeatedly, not on the list of approved brands, they will not be allowed to be sold in California. Jessica, anything else to add on enforcement?
Nope.
Great. Well, we made it through. This is why we cannot do this in 1 hour. Ultimately, there's a lot of questions and a lot of details, and we did not go into all the details. We'll jump back to the questions, but I also want to stop here to make sure that people understand that there's still a lot of opportunities to get involved. Here's a list of getting involved with CPSC. Our social media, we post all the updates there. We have free email newsletters where we announce big things like when CalRecycle created the listserv. We also have a monthly textile task force. We're really proud that this is free of charge. We've created working groups so that we can go into the details. So this is going to be every other month, starting in 2025. We will be preparing for the CalRecycle workshops. We'll be preparing the members so that they understand how to read regulations, how to participate and submit comments. And ultimately, the working groups are where we're going to talk about the details. So, for example, we have an entire working group on the PRO. So we can discuss who we've heard is applying, what we think should be required of them, opinions on certain groups. We also have a working group for recyclers, so we can talk about the definition of recycling, how to make sure that the recyclers that are part of the program are the types of processes that are not causing damage to the environment. So it's a really good space. It's been sponsored by a lot of amazing organizations. If you want to become a sponsor, that's the best way. If you want to present to the task force. And the other way is we originally mentioned that we are doing projects. And if you want to expand your collaboration with local government, expand your collaboration with thrift stores and collection infrastructure, we have a lot going on in 2025 and beyond. And we have a sliding scale opportunity. So for small businesses or startups, we can do low cost or free participation. And as you can see, we have a lot of big events that are going to be happening in California prior to the implementation of this program. So we are really thankful for our partners at the City of Los Angeles. The City of Los Angeles does have a policy goal to implement a local program. Funny enough, they were not preempted, so they can if they want to. And SB 707 will not be in place before FIFA, the Super Bowl, and the Olympics, which will all take place in Los Angeles. So working with the city and the local government waste authority, we are working closely with brands, sorters, recyclers, so we can consider a temporary collection program for these events. But more importantly, we're developing a fabric made from textile waste sourced from Los Angeles, woven into or knitted into a fabric in Los Angeles, and we're working with some cotton recyclers domestically. So we're really excited. If anyone on the call is making products for the Olympics, whether it's merchandise, trademark uniforms, we really want to encourage everyone to join the Los Angeles pilot project. We're really excited. Hopefully in 2025, we will release that fabric. It'll be as close to 100% recycled content that we can get without losing some performance. But at the end of the day, we can make all the fabric in the world, but we need the brands to buy it and make products with it. So for the brands on the call, really want to encourage you. We've modeled the Los Angeles pilot as a mini EPR program. The way the funding flows and the way the materials are accessed, low cost or free, is basically replicating how an EPR program works. So a really good opportunity by joining the Strat Los Angeles Working Group is the best way to access that pilot project. And if you want to fund in and become a sponsor or become a recipient of that fabric that we're developing, please email us and we can definitely get you involved. And the link is in the chat because apparently the QR code doesn't work. So let me go back to questions and I can jump to the timeline. I can jump to any of the slides based on some of the questions that maybe we didn't answer during the presentation. Ryan?
Yeah, so one question from Gail was she's interested to learn more about how microfiber products will be viewed as possible toxins, if you guys can speak to that.
There is a specific provision about microfiber shedding in the bill, along with kind of PFAS. So the PRO and the plan, they have to come up with strategies to avoid that type of contamination. So that was definitely something that was pretty integral part of this process that we wanted to make sure, was addressed in some way. And hopefully that can help. Along with, there's plenty of other legislation that has come out of the legislature and will continue to be so about this, that, is more about the impact on the water systems. But for the sake of this program, we didn't want to stay silent on it. But there are other laws that are either already in effect in California that tackle, PFAS and other contamination. Yeah, the legislature cares a lot about this, so we will continue to be tackling it, and it is in the program as well.
Great.
And as Jessica mentioned, it's in the program as a strategy, it's in the plan. How does the PRO plan on addressing, reduction of microfibers? It's not a clear requirement in eco-modulated fees. We could advocate for them to consider that. But one of the other things that it's in the program is we have laundering as part of the definition of repair. And then there's provisions that participating laundries need microfiber filtration. So it's not widespread, but only the participating laundries will get producer-funded filtration. But it is a global precedent. For the first time ever, the industry will be funding the microfiber filtration for the participating laundries.
And then we have a question here from Connie, and I know we discussed it a little bit, but she wants to know, how do global manufacturers find out about the PRO and who they are?
The best place is through CalRecycle, but it'll be the responsibility of the PRO to recruit members and stakeholders to be part of their application process. So it's in the PRO applicants' best interest to put their names out there and to start signaling to the brands that they, could be one option. But ultimately, like we said, once CalRecycle approves the PRO, and then the deadline to join is when really heavy outreach and education to the producers will happen. So 2026.
And again, I think if you're a big company, you have people that are, watching regulations pop up. There's gonna be awareness about it if you're one of these producers. I don't foresee like a situation where somebody just goes, "Oh, I had no idea." They're part of associations. They have their own lawyers on staff. They have government relations folks. So a small business could totally understand them not knowing that this existed, but that's why we have that de minimis. And there will be outreach by the PRO once it's gone. But big corporations, they know it's here and they know it's coming.
Okay, and then another question we had was, what was the response from apparel and textile manufacturers to the bill, and what are the expected additional costs now that this bill is being implemented?
I think there was a little confusion at first that it only applied to manufacturers in California, and that's definitely not the case. And so once we kind of worked with the domestic in-state manufacturers and understood that, like, hey, it's actually a benefit because it's actually more of a fee of those entering the market. So the burden falls on who's selling it into the market. So it's actually not a huge burden on the manufacturer unless they own the trademark and the brand. Overall, I think a lot of the manufacturers are looking forward to it if they work with recycled content, because there's a lot of mills that can't work with recycled content. So when we talk about manufacturing, if we're talking about the yarn, there's a lot of investment into spinning and kind of making those yarns with the recycled materials. If we're talking about manufacturing the fabrics, a lot of them are already doing this. And so it's more of an excitement for receiving funds that are currently paid for R&D and development, which can be expensive. So overall, I'd say a little confusion, but once there was understanding, really a lot of excitement and welcoming of funds to transition from virgin to recycled content.
We have a question here from Azra, who wants to know what career opportunities are available for individuals with law degrees and experience in sustainable fashion, intellectual property, and compliance to help contribute to the implementation or the advocacy of 707.
Well, CalRecycle will be hiring up for an entire new program very shortly. And so that would be an amazing opportunity if you do want to work in state government. I enjoy it immensely. California is a great place to work. And then as well as, any brand is going to need to be within compliance. The PRO will also have to staff as well. So once that is certified, they'll be hiring jobs as well. So I think there's a lot. We're basically creating, an entire new economic system. It exists already in certain forms, but there will be a lot of opportunities. CPSC, you did an estimate Joanne, of how many like jobs? Because
Yeah.
there could also be, you know, lower wage, good wages, but lower wage in terms of being a lawyer or not, of like repair businesses and laundering and stuff as well. So Joanne, you guys did an assessment.
Yeah, so the established programs, carpet mattresses, which are fiber recycling programs, they report to CalRecycle in their annual report, how much material they manage and how many jobs are supported by the program. So we're able to get a jobs per ton metric, and then we have predictions of how much textile waste will enter this program. So when we applied that factor to the predicted waste, it was 700 to 1,000 jobs will be supported for this program. Some will be created as new, some might be established programs that just get new funding streams, but 700 to 1,000 is what we expect of jobs for this program.
Great. Question here from Madison is there a definition listed in the law about what would constitute secondhand items for producer exemption? Would this include returned or other waste products that might be passed on to the secondhand markets?
Ooh, the return, that's a good question.
Yes, there is a definition of secondhand products and markets. That I believe that was already established in other statutes, so we just, you know, referenced further law, but it is, I believe it's more about like post-consumer. So that there's this weird gray area, and Joanne can get into it more, of like returns versus secondhand, right? Because returns, it is still the ownership of the company, you know, the consumer is returning it back to the company. It's now the company's product again, versus if it's secondhand, I'm the consumer, I'm done with my product, and I'm going to give it to another third party who then can go on and sell it. So that's where it's a secondhand.
Yeah, and that level of details in the plan. But ultimately, yeah, if it's return, kind of depends if they paid the fee or not. So the fees are paid quarterly. So let's say they paid the fee on that sale and someone returns it a few quarters later, that could be a challenge in the modeling. But if it's returned to the ownership of the producer, it's not actually in the market.
Gotcha. And another question from Connie. Will individuals be bringing their clothing directly to collection sites rather than a nonprofit?
They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, the other nonprofits can act as collection sites. So like, you know, we've stayed very collection agnostic in this bill. So you know, and we want to support existing thrifts and secondhand infrastructures. They're actually given priority, nonprofits and other secondhand markets as collection sites, right? Because we want to support existing businesses that are already in our communities, but also recognizing, you know, the need for convenience. So allowing for you know, collection boxes and mail back, etc. So you know, we have, you know, Goodwill and a couple of other thrifts and secondhand markets that are in support of the legislation, and they see it as, you know, I'm not going to speak on their behalf, but as potentially beneficial to their business model of, you know, creating community access and jobs. So no, they're not mutually exclusive, as Joan said.
Yeah, one of the great provisions that was, you know, really advocated for by thrifts and secondhand resellers was, you know, the support of the labor to separate usable from non-usable, and the labor to prepare for resale. So ironing, tagging, like that's all a cost to these businesses that will be considered in the modeling. But ultimately, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If people are already going to thrifts, already using mailback, already using the kiosks in the parking lot, we want to keep as much support as we can for the existing infrastructure.
The next question is, are there any penalties or fines to assist with the current situations in Accra, Atacama, and other global cities, textile waste sites from California producers, or incentive for them to do good?
Yes, that's the whole bill. Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't, there's limits on what just the state of California can do in terms of export. That's under federal jurisdiction, but you know, the design of the program and the need for responsible end markets, as we were talking about, you can't just ship your, you know, your waste to another country and count that as recycling or count that as doing anything for the program. And so, you know, there will be potentially malice fees and other systems for those folks. Big part of the problem too is that we don't really know the movement of goods in a lot of ways or where it's coming from. And so the reporting as well will allow us to track, kind of the flow of goods and where it's ending up. Because there are secondhand markets in other countries that are operational and do good for those communities. And we don't want to, that's not going to stop. We don't want that flow to stop, but it's the excess stuff and how that's moving that we'll be able to get a better look at, and that will be incorporated into the fees of the program.
Yeah, and the question they said how to help the secondhand markets internationally, and I think that word help, there's financial incentives if they participate in the program. They're paid California minimum wage, got that one in there. They are paid for the materials, they're paid for their labor. If they're recycling internationally, getting an upcycling. I know there's a lot of amazing upcycling and repair processes coming out of those secondhand markets. So those are all paid, and it's helping those communities grow those businesses. But when I think of the word help, I also think of remediating the damage that's already been done. Which was a harder provision to get in. So that's why we talked about the Textile Relief Fund. So if the PRO is non-compliant, or if there are non-compliance fines, that money goes to a fund that's specifically worded to clean up the environment, invest in the people abroad who are impacted, invest in community cleanup. So not just like invest in more recycling. If there's a non-compliance fine in that fund, it is there for remediation of past damages. So help can come in a couple different forms.
Next question is from Susan. She wanted to clarify, how do manufacturers, licensed apparel brands that manufacture offshore with non-company owned factories fit into the program?
The license holder will be who owns the license, or the license trademark holder pays that fee. If they don't pay the fee, it falls on the importer. If the importer doesn't pay the fee, the distributor has to pay it. If the distributor doesn't pay it, it does fall on the retailer. So if the retailer doesn't want to pay fees, try not selling non-compliant brands.
Next question here is from Julie. She asks, can you share what recycled content requirements were not included in the bill?
None. There were no recycled content mandates. Few reasons for that. Primarily the microfiber, PFAS, and water protection. California is a very water conscious state, has a very strict stance on protecting our water and making sure we're not mandating something that would cause an unintended consequence. So there's nothing stopping the PRO from putting a recycled content mandate in the eco-modulated fees. We highly encourage it. And that could be a future bill, but at the end of the day, with the science really showing the shedding and some of the chemical concerns with recycled content mandates, it is not in the bill. I will say also a reminder, it's not a textile to textile mandate. So it can go to insulation and filling and fluff and still be qualified, especially if that's the safest end market right now. There's other issues that are popular in this particular industry, like organic, regeneratively produced fibers, natural fibers. Those are being considered in not only the eco-modulated fees, but also in some of the strategies of reducing the impact of the program. So again, leaning into the industry certifications and kind of trends and research, the program does have flexibility to incorporate other measures of sustainability other than just recycled content.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of as Joanne said, California has banned PFAS in new products previously. I think it's going into effect next year. And so, right, as our kind of waste stream is still dirty with all those chemicals, if we're forcing, the companies to put that back into new products, then we're in the same position. But as that waste stream gets cleaner over time, after the ban goes into effect, there will be more hopeful opportunities for textile. And again, like, it could be a bill that another legislator runs down the line. There's nothing, a current legislature can't bind a coming legislature with law. So anybody can pass a new bill or introduce one as this evolves. But hopefully we want the implementation to roll for a little bit and see how it goes first.
Erica would like to know if unaltered textiles and fibers, including bolts of fabric, skeins of yarn, etc., are covered by the textile article definition.
Fabric on the bolt was on. So we were asked originally, what are all the pathways that it enters the market? And we're like, oh, you could buy it on the bolt. But we removed fabric on the bolt, one, because we don't want it double fee. So if they're paying it on the fabric and then they're also paying it on the apparel and product, it's a little bit challenging for the modeling. And lastly, we want to encourage small home designers, and we want to encourage those who are buying fabrics and dead stock and making it on their own. So it's not in as a fee paying, but it is in if you're using dead stock in your designs, that could be one of the factors of eco-modulation. So there's incentives to, reduce your waste of fabric on the bolt, but dead stock is technically an industrial waste and not in this program.
A question here from one second, Gail. There's no federal regulation on re-export of secondhand clothing, and she wants to know how California will manage this situation.
I'm going to take it, Jessica, and then where do you want me to?
Well, again, I think kind of the previous question, we covered this a little bit, but just, yeah, you're right. Yes, we can't limit, interstate commerce. But the structural differences of the fees and the tracking, and the broad public awareness of public information that's coming out of this program, those things will hopefully move the needle. And we encourage advocacy at the federal level. But we, as the state of California, can't do that. But there are definitely some federal updates that need to be made to labeling standards, trade in general. Like it's a much bigger thing than just what we can do in California, but we tried to, as much as we could within the scope of state law, influence and nudge things in different directions.
Yeah, there's a provision that it should be processed as close to the point of generation as possible with as low GHG impact as possible. That's the closest we could get to actually saying we would love to process in California, but we can't mandate that through multi-state commerce law. We also can't mandate that things stay domestically within the United States. So we can incentivize domestic recycling and manufacturing, but it's definitely, and sorting really, it's not mandated and it can't be. The PRO, it's their responsibility to vet the program participants. There was a question of how are sorting international going to be vetted. The responsibilities on the PRO. So it's through the contract negotiation and enforcement that the PRO will be responsible for making sure the international recipients of the funds are meeting the law. That being said, if they don't want the program funds, they're not in the program. So not everyone around the world are going to be funded by this program. It's more or less, are they processing materials coming from California? Do they meet the requirements? And do they have an active contract with the PRO that gives them the leverage for reporting? We also talked internationally. I think one of the biggest changes really is the reporting. They will, if they want to receive programmatic funds, they will have to let the PRO know what they received, how much was sorted by what market, and where those materials went.
I think that is it for the questions right now.
Wonderful. Well, that's really good timing because we're coming up on our 2-hour mark. So I just want to kind of encourage everyone again to really watch. This is just the beginning. No one's late to the game. We're really just beginning. So Cal Recycle will be the agency in charge of everything. They will be very public, very transparent. Joining their listserv, getting involved with Cal Recycle is a really great way. And also CPSC is really proud that our opportunities are free or low cost. making sure all the impacted stakeholders have a way to get informed and a way to get practice for the program is really important to us. So please don't hesitate to email us. Please don't hesitate to reach out, follow us on social media. This recording will be uploaded to our YouTube. We will email the link and the slides to everyone. So with that, I want to thank my co-panelists, Ryan and Jessica. I want to thank all the endorsers and the stakeholders involved with the bill, and especially want to thank CalRecycle for their technical assistance and their leadership in program implementation. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you, everyone. Bye.